Oh, no audio, Nicole.
Oh, well,
We
you mean that
started
whole
off
time I was just
right. Yeah.
okay. Let's start again. I was just talking about how I'm a little bit out of practice because I haven't done this in a while. Welcome to K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and I've got my co-host here, Paul Balogh. And today we also have our colleague, Carlos Ruiz Lantero. Sorry about the kerfuffle.
It's it just shows we're definitely out of practice. It's been a while since we've done this.
Yeah, so I was talking, and then as soon as we go live, I press mute. I mean, don't ask me why. I'm in a new setup, so that's what I'm going with. But it's been a while since we last had this at all. There have been some holidays, some vacation days, and then some like company shutdown days. But we are back. What's happened in the meantime? Paul, you want to talk about Grafana Online?
Oh yeah, no, that was cool. Yeah. So what was that? 3 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago? No, maybe 3 weeks ago. But yeah, Nicole and I, we got to do a presentation on K6 testing without limits, going over all the extensions and everything like that. So that was a blast. That was the week-long Grafana festival. I don't know. But yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah, I'm going to post a link to our video because you can actually watch it for free as well, but this is the direct link. And Paul's very nice to include me. It's mostly Paul with a little bit of me. We were talking about extensions, K6 extensions, and the useful and not so useful, but still cool things that you can do with it. Other
right.
things, Leandro Melendez, another one of us developer advocates, wrote an awesome article about how to implement rendezvous points in K6. And I'm putting the link as well because it was a pretty awesome one. And it's something that has been asked about a lot, especially from people who are transitioning from LoadRunner or JMeter, because those tools have that natively and it's a little bit more obvious how to do it. And then what else have we got here? Vince Huang, one of our new colleagues who will be on next week, actually.
Yay.
Went to a Chaos Mesh community meeting where he talked about all things chaos. And here's that link. And then, last thing was that I was on the I was on the DevOps Paradox podcast talking about performance testing with K6. And that's on this link. So we have been doing things, just not necessarily office hours. And the biggest news, I think, is that K6 version 0.39 is out. We just published release notes on that. And here you can read them. The release itself has some minor improvements, but what's more exciting are the things that have been the groundwork that's been done for future things. I'm particularly excited about Prometheus Remote Write, potentially later on being merged into core and distributed tracing. That's what I got out of that. So go on, Paul.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, for some of the extensions that we have, they're kind of being promoted to the core. So we'll enable a little bit of an experimental way to use it, and then that way, then we can get feedback for maybe a release or two before we actually merge it in and be fully merged into core. So yeah, it's going to be cool. A lot of these extensions, and especially like Nicole said, the Prometheus Remote Write, that'll be nice.
Yeah, so because we always put them in extensions before putting them into core. And the thing is, you still have to then use XK6, but I think there's a plan to now be able to just have them as modules within core, so you can just import them if you'd like. Hey, Mustafa's here. Hey, Mustafa. Okay, with that stuff out of the way, Carlos, would you like to introduce yourself? Who are you? What are you doing here?
Of course, I'm Carlos. I'm from Spain. I've been living a few years in England, but I'm back to the country of the sun. And I am a backend developer for say K6. And yeah, before that, I was being a contractor in the UK. And yeah, it's been crazy because a few months ago I was watching some Office Hours episodes, and now out of nowhere I'm here with you. Pretty excited about it.
That's so awesome.
Just get
I
ready.
mean,
Your
with
Twitter
how
handle is going to blow up. You're going to get all kinds of
not really.
followers
Yeah.
now because of our worldwide presence that we have. So
Sure. I mean, with how I started this show, I'm sure that your expectations will only fall from there. So, what were you doing before K6? You said you were a consultant. Were you doing the same sort of thing also in backend?
Yeah, it was pretty much the same kind of thing. I've always been doing roles related to Python backend, but also DevOps stuff. I had this kind of mixed set of tools and likes. And yeah, I was actually starting contracting because I wanted to move abroad, to move back to my country. And that was probably the easiest way. But then K6 and I met and we were kind of aligned in our goals. So very happy to join and continue what I was doing here.
How's it been so far?
It felt like I've been here for more than a year, and I think it's only been 7, 8 months. So I guess that's good because I feel we've been through many things in a short period of time, and I kind of feel the same, not just in my short journey with K6 and Grafana, but also 2022. I feel like we're just waking up from some sleepy period of COVID, but yeah.
Yeah, I
Out
was
well.
excited to have you on, especially because with every new person of K6 that speaks Spanish, I'm like, yes, a little bit closer to having like K6 office hours en español.
yeah.
I'll be definitely down for that. Yeah.
Awesome. I will remember that.
Yeah.
That's it now. You've signed away your rights.
Yeah, really. And I definitely need to brush up on my Spanish. Pretty much the only Spanish I know is like "Hola, me llamo Pablo," so
Aww.
yeah, Leandro
That's
agrees.
good.
He's-
Español para todos. I actually tried to do a Spanish one. You can see it in the playlist. Daniel Gonzalez Lopez and I did like sort of like K6 office hours in Spanish. My Spanish, I think, isn't quite up to the task, but maybe someday.
It's very good, Nicole. We had our own sessions before, and it's very good.
Thanks. It's always improving. But tell us what you like to do outside of work when you're not taking care of K6 Cloud.
Yeah, when I'm outside work, I actually like to do exactly the opposite of what I do at work. So if you think of a regular backend developer work life, it's basically coding for 7, 8 hours. Especially if you work remote, you're kind of alone with the people in your house. So I like to shift that and basically burn energy, do sports, and I usually like to do social sports. So I've tried a few things. I like football. I like squash. I've been lately doing CrossFit since I came back to Spain because I've got a friend that has a CrossFit gym actually. So I got a kind of premium membership there.
Oh, wow.
So it's a kind of perfect balance between burning my brain alone at home and then suddenly do quite the opposite and burning the rest of my energies with people outside. So that's my classic week.
That's cool. It all sounds very Spanish, especially the football part.
yeah.
Yeah, quite a stereotype, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
You
Sure
play
about these
squash, but
days.
you need to add tennis in there.
I used to play when I was 14, 15 years old, and I'd like to maybe find someone these days to kind of unbox my old tennis skills and see if they're still any good. But yeah.
So tell us what you've been working on at K6, the work side of things.
So I think I've been mostly because I started this project, or at least I joined this project late 2021. So pretty much my entire time in K6. which is we call it Project SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, but it's basically our move from Amazon ACS, which is a service we currently use for running K6 Cloud, to Kubernetes. And it is a huge project on its own. It has many different sub-projects inside and many things we have to do. So yeah, I've been happily working on it for 5 months already, with the joining force of and many other backend people from the open source team and people from the DevOps team. So it's a kind of joint effort that we're slowly rolling out.
So was this something that you had done before K6?
Not really, not this specific task of moving something to Kubernetes. So I'm kind of learning some of the things on the way as well, which is something I always like to do. I've done a lot of DevOps stuff, so many things related to infrastructure and automation and scaling, but not this one in particular. So it's kind of cool that yeah, we're doing this journey kind of for the first time for me and the company.
Yeah, that's awesome. I hope you don't mind me asking questions. I'm definitely, I'm definitely a Kubernetes noob still. So if I ask some stupid questions, just forgive me. But wait, I don't know exactly the timings. When you joined, did we already want to do this, or like how did that happen? Why are we even trying to migrate?
I think the project was already going when I joined. So I don't know exactly when it started, probably before I joined. I'm not sure how long has been running. I should probably know. That's a very good question. I will find out later. But yeah, I think the project was kind of in the early stages. We had the basic infrastructure in place. So when I joined the project, we already had the clusters deployed, but they didn't have any of, or they didn't have much of our application. So that's more or less the point where I joined. And yeah, now we can say we have a lot of stuff running there.
So what's the difference between ECS and EKS? Because they're both Amazon services, right? And you said we were on ECS before this project.
Yeah, so ECS stands for Elastic Container Service, if I'm not mistaken. And this is one of the first, I think it was probably the first service that AWS had for applications running in containers. And it's mostly meant to be easy and managed by them. Like, you don't really need to overcomplicate things when you use it. Whereas EKS is basically Amazon's implementation of the Kubernetes interface. So they're kind of different. And it's even funny in a way because people think EKS goes a little bit against Amazon's interests because they kind of want you to lock you to their products and services. Yeah. And Kubernetes actually is an open interface that you can easily move from one provider to another. So it's kind of sitting in that middle ground where Amazon is like, well, I want you to run your stuff on my cloud, but actually I would rather like you to run on our services that are like purely managed by us and you can never run away from. So that's more or less the difference.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess, Amazon saw the writing on the wall as all these different container orchestration systems were coming out. I mean, because there's, Kubernetes was just one of them. And then they had, obviously, ECS. And then there was also Docker Swarm. And then, I'm drawing a blank. I think Mesosphere had an implementation as well. So, yeah, it's just one of those ones, join them or lose out. So, yeah. AWS is no dummy.
Yeah. I read some thread somewhere that. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry, I was just going to say you go first, and then we'll tackle a question by Vladislav.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that I read some people complain about EKS in some ways, and they're basically saying this fact that they don't really want it to be perfect, so that you can run away from them. So they try to drag you into Fargate and ECS. So, but yeah, that's interesting point.
So I think you were talking about Marathon, right, Paul? Is that what you're talking about for Mesos?
I don't.
But I think it's been deprecated.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm not entirely sure.
There was like ACDC. I keep wanting to say ACDC,
AC/DC.
but that's the logo looks like the band logo. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't remember what it was, but yeah, there was something from Mesosphere, and then they were one of the early products. But yeah, I don't think that's around any longer.
Yeah. And then there's HashiCorp Nomad as well. So Vladislav's question, Vladislav Trayanov, what were you using before, Fargate or ECS on EC2?
I guess if the question is related to K6 Cloud, the question is, I don't know, to be honest. When I joined, everything was running on ECS, and I'm not sure. I suppose we were running some sort of basic instance, so EC2 kind of system, but yeah, that's another question I will need to find out.
Well, here's the answer from Mustafa. We were using
There you go.
ECS and EC2. How awesome is it to have some of our other engineers here? Naveen Kumar also commented, Fargate is a premium flavor of Kubernetes. Technically, Fargate is an Amazon service on top of Kubernetes. It's more like Kubernetes is open source. It was originally Google, but it is open source, and I believe AWS Fargate is like another layer on top of EKS, which is their managed service. So it's not technically just related to Kubernetes. Is that right?
Yeah, I think what Fargate does, I haven't used it myself personally, but I think it kind of gives you a managed service around the underlying hardware that is running your container application. So it's kind of a management layer on top, just to make things even easier.
Yeah.
But I haven't used it myself, so don't trust me too much on this one.
So I guess we could step back a bit and talk about different ways to implement Kubernetes. Like once we've decided we're going to use Kubernetes, there's self-hosted, which I think almost nobody, like in one of the bigger companies anyway, I think people don't really think of that when they think Kubernetes. So there's self-hosted, and then there's these managed services, kind of like EKS or GKE, and even DigitalOcean has Kubernetes engine now. And then the difference is, if it's self-hosted, you have to do everything yourself. You have to manage a control plane and everything. With a managed service, a lot of that is removed, and all you have to do is manage and provision your nodes, the underlying infrastructure of a cluster. And then beyond that, there's this additional layer, and that's where the like Fargate would come in, which is like it's a serverless compute engine. So not only are they managing all the control plane stuff and all of the things that you have to do with encryption and whatnot, but also they provision and manage the nodes for you.
Yeah, so essentially, when you need to choose a provider, you basically compare what's the difference in that level of what this provider manages for us, what kind of level of control you want to have over that. Because I'm pretty sure, I'm sure EKS is slightly different from the Google Cloud one, which are the two I've seen before. And yeah, you basically have these two parts where you need to deploy stuff to kind of the open interface of Kubernetes, but then you have that little small part where you're vendor locked. Like for example, for EKS, you need to specify permissions, node groups, and that kind of thing. So you're not entirely locked out from AWS. That's the part that changes from provider to provider.
So Mustafa says Fargate is compatible with both ECS and EKS, so definitely not just Kubernetes. Kang Lee from LinkedIn says, Carlos mentioned migrating K6 Cloud to EKS. Does K6 also take this experience to write out the guide and recommendation for K6 OSS users running K6 and Kubernetes? So there's a lot of K6S in there. It's a bit confusing, but it's just K6. It's not Kubernetes. But okay, let's see what he's trying to say. Do we have a guide and recommendation for K6 OSS users running in Kubernetes? We do. But go ahead, Paul.
Oh, I was just going to mention that's the K6 operator will let you run your own extended K6 or whatever, but you can run that distributed test in Kubernetes clusters.
So
Yeah,
I Kang did it on LinkedIn, so I will try and put I'll put a comment here for everybody as well. This is the K6 operator that Paul was talking about.
Yeah.
And I think oh no, we haven't done one on it recently. There's a lot of development going on on this
Yes.
front as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work that's going on right now with the operator. So hopefully things should stabilize and get a lot more documentation going with that as well. I know that Nicole and I have plans to do some talking about that here in the not too distant future. So so look forward to that.
Yes, so yes, there is a guide or a way to run K6 in Kubernetes as a custom resource object.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because right now it uses customize for your YAML templates to be able to set that up and deploy the operator. I know that there is an open pull request right now for from a contributor to do a Helm chart for the operator. I don't know if that's been merged just yet. I know that there was some discussion going on around that, so we'll have to see. But that is kind of another option that's coming.
So, Carlos, we're talking about the difference between ECS and EKS. And it sounds like there are two things. One is that EKS is Kubernetes and ECS is not, but also that there is a complexity difference. That's what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, that ECS is maybe less complex, but also less fully featured, and EKS is more complex, but also has more features. Is that right?
yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah.
So, do you know, was there anything in particular that we were struggling with ECS? Like, what were the things that were too complex?
I think we're probably not running away from ECS because of something bad we found there, but we're mostly going towards Kubernetes because we want to take advantage of it. So I think ECS was not bad for us. It probably worked well for the years or months that we were running on. But basically, this thing of not being vendor locked is key for us to unlock many projects in the company. And running on Kubernetes is one prerequisite to unblock all these nice features we can do in the future. So it's not that ECS was doing the wrong thing. It's mostly like we want to run on Kubernetes so we can do all this cool stuff. So that's the main reason.
So now was ECS
the push and pull, right? The push and pull reasons. It was mostly a pull, not a push.
Yeah. Now with ECS, did you have to? Were you in kind of YAML hell where everything was YAML based configuration, or with ECS?
Not really. ECS is mostly one of these AWS objects with maybe 10, 15 things to configure: environment variable, CPU, memory, and like Docker image, and you're pretty much done. It's not very complicated, and then they provide you with some easy scaling options, and that's it. You're running your container is up, but yeah, nothing too complicated.
I think Amazon themselves they suggest EKS as the more resilient option as well. And when you're running a platform where people literally use your platform to run load tests on other applications, like, yeah, resiliency is a big motivator for us. It would be pretty embarrassing. Like,
Yeah,
if
indeed.
something just suddenly went down.
Yeah, we had to be very careful every time we were migrating services, and we'll probably talk about it. But yeah, we were using K6 to test ourselves when we were doing this move. So it was a kind of a big K6 inception we were running through this process.
That's awesome. But wait, so what exactly are the components that were affected by the migration?
So basically, I can see our services divided in stateless services and stateful services. So this first iteration, we're doing all the stateless ones. So we have a lot of API services. We have asynchronous services, basically task management and async stuff. We also have some, let's call them satellite services that do other things like orchestration or even database migrations themselves. They're not a service, but they are something we need to manage as well in Kubernetes. So we are moving all that stuff to Kubernetes. And then probably another thing for the future will be looking at our stateful things like databases and RabbitMQ and all these services that keep state. So we're mostly focusing on this first pass on our APIs and anything that doesn't have a state, which is most of the system, I would say.
So is there like a complexity reason why you decided to do just the stateless ones first and then stateful ones later?
Yeah, it's because basically all the stateful stuff like databases and things, customers can just provide them. Like you can maybe write a guideline of what you need, what kind of database size you need, and then you can just configure your K6 Cloud Kubernetes manifest to connect to that, and that's it, right? It's not ideal from the point of view of having something that works out of the box, but you can get a first version of K6 Cloud running if you just put those things aside and you just connect to them. That's something you cannot do with our own application code, basically. I guess the difference. Sorry, just to wrap up. I guess the difference is that the stateful services, they're not our software. They're like databases that are written by someone else. So it's very easy to configure them and then plug them into our stateless K6 Cloud. That's the reason.
Okay, that makes sense. And you said that it's not just you that's doing this, right? That seems like it would be very scary for one person to be in charge of all this. Who else is involved?
Many people, indeed, thankfully, because I couldn't do this alone, of course. We have actually 3 teams collaborating. The 2 main ones are the DevOps team and the backend teams for obvious reasons. They manage the infrastructure, we manage the services, and we also have a lot of gray areas where both teams just jump on each other to help and push. And we also recently had people from the OSS team, the open source team, joining, because some of our services actually run based on the open source code. So some of our Golang colleagues jumped in the project as well to help with migrating those services. So yeah, we have a collection of really nice Python, Golang developers and the DevOps team all together.
So how far along are we? I don't think this is done yet, right? But how much has been done?
So we've gone a long way, actually. So we have, I think, 5 APIs, if I'm not mistaken. They're all running in Kubernetes now. Our task services like async processing, we have 2 out of 3, although the one left is probably the biggest one. And we have some MISC services migrated as well, like database migrations and our database connection pooling system. And we've got 1 or 2 services left around orchestration. So I would say maybe we are 80-85% there in terms of all the stateless stuff. So maybe that's the first milestone to have something to show. Let's see.
So what are some technical decisions that you had to make, and did you make the right ones?
We made a lot of decisions for sure. I think most of them were kind of good. To be honest, when I joined, we had already started or decided on many of these things, and then some others were kind of brought later on. But yeah, we got a lot of good decisions on the way, and maybe a couple of things that we would have done differently. But yeah, we can talk about those if you want. But the least defenseless.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So for me, probably the biggest challenge, or the thing that probably I would have done differently, is that alongside the migration, there is a huge sidecar project, which is observability. That's basically our entire Grafana parent company, because we're moving to an entire new infrastructure and we need to monitor in a different way. And also, as part of the project, we were trying to move all our observability systems to Grafana ones. And you had to do it all together, because when you're deploying to a new thing, you need to closely watch it's performing well. You kind of just throw something in the dark and just hope that it works. So we ended up having this kind of side-by-side projects. On one side, the migration, which is what we've been talking about. And then on the other side is just like, hey, migrate your entire observability to this new platform. So maybe if I could go back, I would have maybe laid out these two projects side by side, but clearly defined, like, we need people working on the logging, metrics, tracing, whatever. And then we need people doing the migration, and they need to be aligned and kind of at the same level of progress, because we ended up just jumping on and off between these two. You couldn't really leave one project behind the other, otherwise, yeah. So that will be my main kind of thing I will do differently, or at least plan differently.
So now are Grafana agents like deployed with each of the containers or something, or within each of the pods, I should say?
Yeah, we're using the pool approach. So our APIs are exposing the metrics, and then we have the Grafana agents scraping them out,
Right.
and we're building this new fancy dashboards to check that everything is in place and running properly. But yeah, we've been building most of that from scratch alongside the project.
Nice.
So we were already using some of the Grafana stack, right? Like, I know Grafana itself we were using, but I think we were also using Datadog.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So I think in terms of logs, we were already using Loki, so we didn't have to do anything on that side. But the metrics, as you said, we were using Datadog, and we're moving everything to Prometheus now. So yeah, basically we had to build all that stuff from scratch. And yeah, some of my colleagues know that Prometheus hasn't been entirely helpful lately. So we had some bumps here and there. So that's the other side of the project that maybe we didn't really think of as something that could get big as a task.
So it sounds like you're saying that there are two different layers. One is that we were changing the observability stack itself. And then concurrently with that, we were also changing all of the sources for that observability stack. So would you say, because you were saying that you would have done it differently and by scoping out each one and like fully, I guess you underestimated the complexity of that. Would you say that it would have been easier to just change the observability stack first and then migrate to Kubernetes, or another way?
Yeah, I think you pointed out the right order. I think observability needs to be ahead of the other side, or at least at the same level. Because what we found is that basically we were trying to migrate stuff, but then we realized, wait, we're not ready yet. We need this basic stuff before we make any move. So we were kind of compensating and trying to do the observability we needed before migrating, but we were kind of pulling as we went. Whereas maybe, as you said, if we planned it before and said, okay, no, hold on, let's just build maybe this whole Prometheus thing first, have it all running, and then maybe do the move to Kubernetes with all this stuff ready, rather than kind of mixing it together, because that was a bit tricky at some point.
Yeah, that would be nice to have a little lessons learned, and what would we change in the process, kind of a blog post or something, so others can learn from that. Because yeah, migrating to Kubernetes is not always the easiest task.
Yeah, especially I think one of the problems, so to say, of this project is maybe the project title, that is just too generic, like site reliability engineering. That you're kind of entitled to bring everything you want to that project, and the scope is like
Yes.
sometimes endless. And yeah, it was quite
Yeah.
common for us to have kind of goals every cycle, and then just ended up doing other things that required like attention now. And it's like,
Yeah. I remember hearing about it. I was like, but like what part of site reliability engineering? Like just do it?
All of it.
Yeah, all of it. So I guess scoping could have been more useful, it sounds like. And were there, I mean, this is all happening in production while our customers are using our services. So how did that go?
I think that's probably the positive side of things, that I think we didn't have any major outages during the migration.
Wow.
As I mentioned earlier, we were doing a lot of dogfooding with K6. So when we were doing the migrations of the APIs, we were carefully building these standalone environments using a tool called Mountebank, which is a tool for isolating services and do component testing. So we had this set up for every single API, and then we were doing our performance testing with K6, making sure we had both ECS and EKS running to similar levels of performance, and then we were doing the move, and those things worked out well, I think, and that's probably the good side. So everything that maybe it's not complaint, but everything that I say I would have done differently, it's only internal. Like in the end, we didn't see any of that friction causing like real problems, at least so far. So fingers crossed we can keep going like that.
So
I'm
I
kind of
actually
curious
really
too.
love
Oh,
Montebank. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I just wanted to say I really love Montebank too. I've used it for load testing as well for the same sort of reason, that when you don't have everything or can't have everything hooked up yet, it's very handy to use some sort of, it's like service virtualization or like a test double. And it's JavaScript based, and it's actually, there's a lot that you can do with it, lots of conditions and triggers for it. I found it really useful too. So you're saying that you used Montebank to sort of test things before you put them into production?
Yeah, exactly. So Mountebank has this cool feature that lets you record service responses. So when you have a system that responds with many fields and attributes, it's almost impossible to manage them by hand. So this tool lets you actually be like an imposter, be in front of be like a proxy imposter in front of you of the dependencies you want to isolate, and record all those answers, and then you take all those responses recorded from Montebank and create your own like isolated environment where you can throw your K6 magic and get some numbers out. So pretty useful.
That's a really good lesson. And Montebank is free and open source too. It's actually really good software. What were you going to say, Paul?
Oh no, I was just going to ask. With the migration, with moving customers over from the one platform to the other, I was kind of just curious if what was some of the secret sauce. I mean, were we like sharding particular customer accounts to say that, oh, okay, this customer is going to be on the EKS while everybody else right now is still on ECS? Was there that type of migration so that there wasn't, these giant outages that, for a couple minutes or something like that affected everyone?
Yes, indeed. That's a very good question. We had a couple of approaches we take. We have this concept in K6 Cloud of releases, and they basically associate your K6 Cloud with a given version of K6, and you can also have special execution configurations and stuff. So we could use that to, let's say, maybe try the EKS rollout to 10% of customers, or maybe just a single organization that was purely internal for us, just to verify that it works. So we could play with those releases and slowly roll out some of our services, not like, as you said, in one go, like suddenly all the traffic goes to the new place and everything is a bit chaotic. There's also another thing that you can do, which is using DNS with weights. So you could have maybe 50% traffic going to ECS, 50% to the other service. in general, we try to keep both running for a while, even if they were not receiving traffic all the time. So we could easily switch on and off, or do like progressive traffic from one to another.
Yeah. So kind of a blue-green scenario where you had both systems up and running, and then you would control with DNS how much is going to. Okay.
Yeah, but we were doing in a per basis case, like each service has its own world of reasoning. But yeah, we had this tool, and with these tools in mind, we decided how to do each service, and it went well. We have an amazing DevOps team, so they were taking care of that.
Good deal.
Yeah, so it sounds like there was so much to do there. Even like you want, I would imagine that when you're shifting customers over, you want customers that aren't like single users, because then you don't, have enough data to go on. But you also don't want to have the very big ones, because if something goes wrong, then it's a lot of tests that we're holding up. So how did you decide which customers got it? Was it purely percentage, or was it like size?
We were not really looking at like customers individually. We were doing more like percentage. So it was kind of an impersonal rollout of the services. So yeah, we were not picking up like customers like one by one. We were just doing slow rollouts of traffic.
So we don't have any beta partners or anything like that. Beta customers that are willing to take on the risk.
No, not really. We were like a democracy in that sense. Like,
yeah.
So how is that all completely done now? Is it 100% rollout now?
Well, that's like for each individual service migrations. At the moment, we're not in the middle of any migration right now. This next development cycle, we will do the last asynchronous task management service we have left to migrate, and then probably the next cycle we will do one of the service we use for orchestration, and that should be it. Like in a few weeks, I don't know exactly how many, but we might have the first alpha, or whatever we want to call it, version of K6 Cloud running in Kubernetes.
Cool. So you mentioned earlier that you were preventing outages, that luckily there weren't any major ones as a result of this. But the other side of that is maybe if services are up, but their performance is degraded, how did you prevent that?
We actually had performance degradation at some point when we were like tweaking some parameters and stuff. So I wouldn't call those major outages, but we had like slowdowns in latency, or maybe some timeouts happening. But that's what the observability side of the project is for, right? That's why we really need a strong basis of metrics and logs, just to be quick and react to those, and revert any changes we do, or maybe take another step up in scaling. So we had this little kind of slowdowns in some stages. I think they were not super visible. They were not like causing any major problems, but internally we had these little bumps that we had to basically control through our observability platform. So that's why we kind of learned along the way that we really needed this part be strong in order to confidently take steps forward in this migration process. So yeah, we definitely had those, but yeah, things are getting now steady and more robust over time.
Kind of curious too with so I mean, I know that with the cloud we now have the private load zones that have been coming through now. I mean, I would assume that's nothing to do with any of the Kubernetes migration, is it? I mean, did private load zones depend on anything from EKS?
Not really. I think because basically K6 Cloud spawns instances to run your K6 tests, right? So that's really independent of the platform that you're orchestrating from. So it doesn't matter if it's ECS or EKS. In the end, you're gonna create those instances anyway and talk to them. So it doesn't make a big difference to us because we will, at least for the short term, we will probably follow the same process for creating load instances, and set up the tests.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious because I mean, it seems like the timelines for these two different projects kind of are a little bit in parallel. So that's why I was kind of curious if there was any kind of dependency at all.
Yeah, no, I think it shouldn't affect us, but yeah, that's a good question.
Here's a question from Kang Lee. If I'm a customer of K6 Cloud when running on Kubernetes, how do you guarantee, say, that the assigned K6 pods are not getting throttled in any way?
I'm not sure if I understand this question, because I'm guessing that when he refers to K6 pods, maybe he's thinking that we are using pods to create load, but that is not the case. We're still using, as Paul asked before, we're using EC2 instances. So if that's what the question refers to, it doesn't make a difference now that we're running Kubernetes. So we're only using pods internally for our own services. They're not assigned to any client in particular. They just run our own stuff, and then the actual hardware or the actual things that run the load tests, they are instances that we create, and they get created in the same way whether we are running in ECS or EKS. But that's my interpretation of the question. Sorry if that was not exactly what it meant. Not sure if you guys read it in a different way.
No, I think he said thanks for the clarification. I think you got it. Also, I wanted to add that from a node perspective, K6 Cloud already has these thresholds that you can use so that you can monitor, memory utilization, CPU utilization, and if any of those thresholds are exceeded, then you'll get an alert to tell you. So that is something that I would recommend that you always look into when you're running a load test.
But yeah, I think overall it's a very interesting question, because when I was we've been recently researching how to migrate our orchestration service to Kubernetes, and I was also wondering, could we also have these load generators running as pods? So
Right.
I think there will be a whole new set of challenges to make that even possible. So I think that's a pretty good, interesting topic. I think we haven't discussed it in depth yet, but that could be maybe something on the table for the future, if we can actually generate the load within the cluster itself and not externally with instances.
Almost like each VU that's spawned would actually be its own pod or something.
Yeah, something like that.
you
I'm
know.
pretty sure the OSS team will crush this dream pretty quickly.
Yeah, that seems like a
but-
significant change.
But at least to me, that was something interesting to at least reason about from a high level point of view. So good question that you asked.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about K6 operator as well, and whether or not we can somehow use that for load generation too.
Yeah, that will be another interesting approach. Maybe plugging one to another. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So are there any other challenges that you faced or learnings that you can share?
Probably another thing we kind of regret, and it's in our roadmap to revisit, is the way we treated the liveness and readiness probes in Kubernetes. So if you have this interface where you can specify whether a service is alive, and on one hand, and then on the other hand, if your service is ready to receive traffic. And we probably took, let's say, a very classic approach where we will basically check our dependencies, which is the kind of straightforward thinking you would have. Well, let's check if all my dependencies are up, and then that's when I'm ready. But we actually found in some cases that could be dangerous, because if one of your dependencies go down, it could actually create a cascade effect across the services. And if you actually go out and do some research, you find out that people actually run away. Some people run away from that approach. And there's a bit of interesting conversation on whether to make heavy use of these heavy ready endpoints, or taking different approaches where you check your dependencies before the pod starts, and then you kind of forget, because you don't want to create this kind of fail cascade effects, and you much rather prefer to have an application that is ready to survive without services. So that's probably one of the things we want to revisit. But
Yeah, that sounds like a scenario from a past life, I should say, where services, service A depended on service B for some of its calls. Well, service B went down, but then we had the readiness probe, saying that, oh, wait, now service A is saying it's down because there's a problem in service B. Well, really, it's not a hard dependency, so it could be resolved with like circuit breaking or, fallbacks in service A to remove that. But that whole cascading thing, then all of a sudden everything's not available.
Yeah, and they're not easy to deal with because
No.
sometimes to overcome those things, you need to do like big changes in the actual application logic.
Yeah.
So they're not always easy to fix. So it's an interesting point of debate when you're writing your Kubernetes stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you actually solve for that?
So we're kind of making our ready checks a bit softer. Like we're not that strict in the things we check, because if one of our services is down, okay, it's down, but let's just not cascade it to everything else, because some of the services can actually survive for a little bit. Sometimes you cannot talk to the cache, but you can talk to the database directly. So maybe if the cache is down, don't panic. Like maybe you're just gonna hit the database a bit harder for
just
a few minutes.
A little more latency,
Yeah, but let's just not panic everything down, and yeah, it's this cascade effect that we're slowly moving away from. As I said, we didn't have any major problems with it, but we actually saw some of these things happening internally, and we decided let's be a bit less strict, and then maybe we can revisit how to do this in a slightly different way. So yeah, that's one of the in progress things we have in this migration.
It's always a learning journey.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
You also mentioned something about the Kubernetes manifest files. You're talking about how to make our services configurable with Kubernetes manifest files.
Yes, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, so basically, I think one of the big end goals of the project is having something that can be deployed on premise. Like you ship this kind of whole Kubernetes config, and you can deploy it anywhere, maybe in your local Kubernetes cluster for development. But once you get to that point, you actually want all your services configuration to be kind of customer ready. Like if you want to install, for example, Loki, and you go to Loki documentation, you see all the config parameters, all the YAML things you can manipulate. And basically all our services that were internal until like this project, now they're going to become something public, because eventually you want to deploy this thing and you want to be able to configure everything. So for example, as we were talking earlier, if you want to connect to your own on-premise database for your own, like from your own company, you need to go to services A, B, and D, and then find the right YAML settings to connect to that database. So we need to make changes in our internal services to be this kind of public ready service with proper YAML config that any customer can manipulate with just a nice documentation guide, which we have for our OSS product. So eventually we would expect to have something similar for this. So that's kind of the end goal, like pushing our configuration to be like, guys, this is going to be public now. Like we need our services to be customer ready in this regard. If that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, now the pushing out of all that stuff too. I guess now I'm kind of getting into the GitOps phase of things. I mean, when you're deploying these releases and you need to pull in those, I guess the custom configs or whatever for an environment, what kind of process are we using?
So that's a question related to what I was talking about. We're using Argo CD, which is basically a tool that reads all your Kubernetes manifests and lets you visualize the state of your cluster. So you can see all your pods, secrets, auto scaling configs, and pretty much everything. And we have it synced with our Git repo. So if you want to make changes to the platform, those could be releases. So for example, our releases are simply new Docker images for the services. So you change the application, you build a new Docker image. So that's kind of in the development pipeline. And then when we want to do the release, all we have to do is just change that image tag, and then Argo CD will let us synchronize that with the cluster. So it's all visible and it's all transparent. You can go to the Git state, like Git history of our cluster, and see, oh, this is what happened. This is when we released, or this is when we changed the scaling config of the service to be, I don't know, that many pods minimum or whatever. And it's all nicely laid out, and anyone can jump and make changes, not just backend developers, but also DevOps team, or even I would say support, technical support could even do some changes if needed. That's kind of the end goal, that anyone with some minimum Kubernetes knowledge can jump in and maybe tweak config value if needed, or change this or that. We want to avoid, if possible, that we
That's
need
me.
develop. Yeah, we want to avoid that for every little change we need to rebuild the application. That's what we want to run away from. We want to give as much power to the DevOps team, because the DevOps team eventually will be customers running our K6 Cloud, right? So that's kind of the end goal with all these things.
Yeah, and I think it's also so that we don't have these silos where we always have to go to you or DevOps to do things. Like it would be better to just empower people throughout the organization to be able to make those changes. If it's something as simple as changing a manifest file, that's way easier.
Yeah, that's the end goal, that we maybe ship some manifests to you, and then you try out K6 Cloud in your local cluster, Nicole, and then you say, hey, I want to connect to this other database, and you go to this YAML file, you change the thing, and that's it. And you don't need to go to ask a developer, hey, can you build a new version of the app that connects to this other thing? So that's a kind of goal with this.
Okay, so where do we go from here? So you said that we're not done yet. I guess the next thing is to think about what we're going to do with the stateful services and how we're going to handle that, whether we ask the client to configure them if they want K6 Cloud on premises, or if we should be, if we're responsible for that, or if we want to take responsibility for that.
I think there's a kind of win-win approach for this. We for sure need to have this configurable. Like, you need services to be configured against different stateful services, and that will enable the first iteration of this project to be deployed, where you say, okay, this is the first version, you need to deploy this RabbitMQ cluster, this database cluster with this kind of properties, and then you configure your K6 Cloud manifest to talk to them. But I think ideally, on top of that, we should also provide some kind of basic out-of-the-box solution, so that you can just deploy your thing and have something basic working. Of course, then depending on the level of load you want to put through K6 Cloud, I guess depending on the number of test runs and VUs and things, you might need to tweak some of those stateful services to handle that load. But I guess we can have a super nice documentation guide saying, or at least some kind of table that correlates, this is the expected load you want, and this is probably the expected size of these services. We give you some out of the box, but we don't really know how big you want your K6 Cloud to be. So I would say that for a first version, maybe you need to plug them in manually, but eventually having something that works out of the box could be a good selling point for us, and a nice way of just playing with it without much trouble or config hell.
So what's one bit of advice that you would give to someone, to a team who is considering starting this journey that you're well in the middle of, or towards actually finishing it? What's one thing that you would say to them?
Good luck.
Good luck.
Other than good luck.
Get yourself a nice team of nice people around you, because you're not doing this alone. Definitely. But yeah, maybe going back to some of the things we talked earlier, I think observability is super, super important, because no matter what you do, this is a human process. There's no way you can automate such complex tasks, and you're gonna need all this observability metrics, logs, and stuff backing you up, and at least shouting at you, "Hey, that's the wrong button. Don't press it again." Yeah, there we go, Marco.
One of our other engineers says, "Don't despair."
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was great having you, Carlos. And this is the
Yes.
first time, your first time on Office Hours, and I hope it won't be the last. Maybe we'll touch base with you again once this project is well underway. I mean, is over. Like
100%.
when, yeah, 100%. Oh, last question
Oh,
from Ladislav
ooh.
Tryanov. What
Yeah,
about the
this is the
billing
one.
after the migration? Do you see any significant differences in the pricing? What a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have no answer for it. I mean, I'm not even sure I can see the billings in AWS with my engineer role. So we will need to bounce that question to someone from the DevOps team, I guess. We don't have anyone around, but yeah, I have
Yeah,
no idea.
I would be
I'm
curious
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
EKS is probably a little bit more expensive, I would assume, because you're kind of untethering yourself from, you're not locked in as much.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
this kind of allowance of just run all the infra you want. Someone
Yeah.
will just take care of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people ask me how much K6 Cloud costs. I'm like, look at our pricing page because I get
Yeah.
it for free. Sorry. Anyway, thank you for being with us, Carlos. Next week we will have Vince Huang to talk about all things chaos. So tune in for that. Thank you to everybody who was watching. See you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
good
much.
one.